Good evening. My name is Jed Silberg, the museum's National Philanthropy Officer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's presentation of By the Grace of the Game. Wolf Blitzer, CNN anchor, child of Holocaust survivors, and like you, a strong supporter of the museum, is here to interview his family friend, author Dan Grunfeld, and his amazing grandmother, Anyu. Towards the end of the interview, Dan's father, professional basketball player and 1976 Olympic gold medalist, Ernie Grunfeld, will join the discussion for what promises to be a very informative evening. Wolf?
Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. I'm here in the CNN Washington Bureau, and I'm the anchor of the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, one of my favorite shows on television, as you probably know by now. And I'm just thrilled to be doing this right now with Dan Grunfeld and his grandma, his lovely, lovely grandmother. We call her Anyu, Lily Grunfeld. And guys, I'm so happy. I know your dad, Dan, Ernie Grunfeld, is going to be joining us later. We'll talk to him a little bit about this. But you have written an amazing book. And let me show the cover to everybody who's watching right now. I went through it. I've read it. It really is a wonderful, important read, and it is so timely right now. By the Grace of the Game, the Holocaust, a basketball legacy, and an unprecedented American dream. That's the name of the book. It's a great name. It's really important. You can't put it down once you start reading it. So Dan, let me start with you. And Anyu, we're going to get to you shortly. But tell us why you decided to write this book.
You know, growing up, my grandmother's been such a profound force in my life, and just knowing what she went through and what my grandfather went through, surviving the Holocaust, you know, fighting to give me and my sister the opportunities that we have, it was always so important to me. And, you know, basketball in my family has been the vehicle through which, you know, we traveled the world and went places we couldn't have imagined. And so I always had a sense of how important the game has been to our family, how much the story has meant to us. And so as I got older and learned even more, I really wanted to write it because it's not just our story. I think it's a really relatable human story. You know, when you talk about overcoming adversity, perseverance, the love of family, those are really relatable themes. And so it really became my dream to tell this story.
Well, tell us, Dan, tell us how the survival story that you heard as a little boy growing up and as you got older and older impacted your life.
Tremendously. You know, just knowing what the human spirit is capable of, what really will is. You know, and my grandmother will tell you a little bit more, but, you know, she was in the Budapest ghetto. Raoul Wallenberg, who the street outside of the Holocaust Museum is named after, saved my grandma's life twice during the Holocaust. And so, you know, just to have that example of someone who, you know, fought so hard and did everything she could to survive, you know, that always had an impact on me. You know, and then coming to America as immigrants, working to build a new life, you know, those are the values that I grew up with, and I tried to apply them in my life. And really, my journey was through basketball. And at the same time, you know, knowing the story of Wallenberg and knowing what happened during the war, he's been really a symbol in my family for standing up for what's right. You know, he wasn't Jewish. He was a Swedish diplomat who recognized that people needed help. You know, and so that's really been a profound example as well of someone who stood up for what's right. And so for so many reasons, my grandma's story and my grandpa's story have just impacted me throughout my life.
I'm a son of Holocaust survivors, so much of this book I could relate to, knowing what my parents went through. All four of my grandparents were killed, were murdered during the Holocaust. So I appreciate your story. And now, sadly, there are increasingly fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors left. Tell us how you survived World War II and the Holocaust.
Well, I was in Budapest when Germany occupied Hungary on 1944, March 19. I was visiting my older sister who was living there. And my father wrote me a letter, come home immediately. But we couldn't travel already, you know. The Germans, first time they started to chase the Jews and send them out to Auschwitz. But we didn't know then, of course, you know, there is an Auschwitz. And the next day I got another letter from my father. If you can stay there. And I never saw him again. I was staying in Budapest. I was about 18 years old then.
And it's an amazing story. And Dan, in the book, By the Grace of the Game, he tells this story so powerfully and so beautifully. I assume, Anu, you've gone through the book, you've read it. Give us your thoughts on how your grandson recreated what happened to you and your family during the Holocaust.
I think he did a great job. I'm very proud of him. Not only that he did a great job, that he wanted to do this. That by itself means a lot to me.
It's so important that we educate everyone. And sadly, Anu, and Dan knows this well, you know, there's a new generation out there. They don't know much about the Holocaust. There aren't all that many Holocaust survivors who are still with us, who can give us an eyewitness account of what happened. That's why it's so important that Dan decided to write this book and to bring it up to speed, because right now it is so important in what's going on, not only here in the United States, but around the world when you see increasing anti-Semitism. I wonder if you want to speak a little bit about that, Anya, from your perspective.
I'm worried about my children and grandchildren because, you know, I'm 96 years old, so it doesn't matter to me so much, but my family, I'm worried.
And, you know, Wolf, that was a big reason why I wanted to write the book, not only to tell our story, but there's so much data out there that shows that the new generation doesn't know much about the Holocaust. It's not taught at schools to the extent that it should be. And so, you know, for me, and you know this too, as the son of survivors, growing up knowing this history, it's something you can't separate from. And so I wanted to tell our family story so that others could engage with this history. And there is kind of a wrapper of basketball, you know, so there's a lot of fun things and entertaining things. And ultimately, it's a hopeful story, you know, for a family to really rise from the ashes of the Holocaust and for my dad to become a basketball star. You know, it's a hopeful story. But yeah, my dream is that younger folks will engage with it to really learn this history, because if we don't tell these stories, no one will. And as Anu always says, she's afraid that it could happen again, you know, and so it's really our job to tell the story so that doesn't happen.
You know, the book, and as I said, it's really a terrific book, Dan. It goes back and forth between chapters. It talks about your grandparents, what they were going through in the Holocaust, how they survived, how they eventually came to the United States, started a new life in New York, and you know, raised their children. But then it goes back and forth to what you were going through as far as, you know, Stanford University, playing basketball there, then playing basketball in Europe and in Israel. Talk a little bit about how you connect your personal story with the advice, the lessons your grandparents taught you about basketball, which it's really an amazing story that you tell, and it's an amazing story that your dad, Ernie Grunfeld, has as well.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned my book is called By the Grace of the Game, and I titled it that quite intentionally because the game for my family really was sent from heaven, you know, to have the background that we do and to find a game that can really change the trajectory of your lives is such a blessing. And so I always felt that power, and that's why I wanted to tell this story. And so, you know, for me, I learned so much from my grandmother, you know, my grandparents and my dad about these experiences. And I definitely translated them to my career as an athlete, you know, because it was all about dealing with adversity, staying positive, you know, and you know, I had challenges in my own career. Of course, nothing can compare to what my grandmother went through. And she couldn't be happier for that, right? That's what grandparents and parents want. They want their children and grandchildren to have it better than them. And because of my grandma and because of my dad, I have. But that being said, I still had my own challenges. I always thought about, you know, got inspiration from what my grandmother went through, what my dad went through. And I think a lot of my success was because of that.
Well, Anu, let's talk a little bit about basketball. As you probably know, I'm a big basketball fan myself. I love the game. I love what's happening on the court. You saw your son, Ernie Grunfeld, go from a kid who was growing up in Queens and came to the United States, couldn't even speak English, all of a sudden become a world-class basketball player, played in the NBA for years, played at the University of Tennessee, was an all-star. it played for the U.S. Olympic team. What was it like, Anya, seeing, first of all, forget about Dan for a moment. Let's talk about Ernie. What was it like to see your son, Ernie, grow up and become one of the great basketball players of all time, and then a great executive with basketball teams, whether the Knicks, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Washington Wizards, become a great executive in the NBA as well. What was that like for you to see that happening here in the United States?
Well, it was a surprise. We didn't know he's such a good basketball player for a long time, till the high school coach, I think, he called us in the store. We had a store in the Bronx, a fabric store. Mr. and Mrs. Grunfeld, come and see your son playing basketball, because he is going to be recruited to colleges. He was already, I think, a senior in high school. So we went there, we closed the store earlier and we went there. The door was closed, but I insisted, that we were invited here. And when we went in, my husband said, you see, your son is not even playing. He did not recognize his own son. He was on the court playing, and he never missed a game again.
You say you were living in the Bronx, not Queens. Is
No,
that right?
we
I
had
know
the
there's a
store at
little
the
rivalry between the Bronx and Queens. I just want to be precise. Where were you?
Where we were in the store, which we had in the Bronx, but we lived in Forest Hills.
In Queens.
In Queens.
I just wanted to be precise on that. I know a lot of our New Yorkers are very sensitive
75th Avenue.
to that issue. So just to recap, did you ever think, Anya, that when you came to the United States, you couldn't speak English, your husband couldn't speak English, your sons couldn't speak English, that all of a sudden one day you would see your little boy grow up to become a world-class basketball player and NBA leader? Did you ever think that could happen?
No, but the coach told us, but we didn't know the American style, how it goes here, We didn't know about the sport at all. We knew in Romania, but in Romania was communism, and it was not a professional sport. My husband was a soccer player and ping pong player in Romania.
And Ernie has told me he was a champion ping pong player, right? He wasn't just a ping pong player.
Great ping pong
he was a great ping pong player.
Yes.
He was world ranked.
That's right.
Yeah, he was world ranked ping pong player. I'm really happy that Anya told the story she did about going to the high school gym and seeing my dad play. And the interesting context there is, my dad came to America, like you said, at 9 years old, and he didn't speak any English, and he had never touched a basketball. And my dad had an older brother, my grandmother's oldest son, and he was diagnosed with leukemia when they arrived in the United States, and he passed away a year later. So this is a great tragedy in our family, and I'm named after my uncle. And so, for my dad as a little boy in America who lost his brother, whose parents survived the Holocaust, this is a very tough background. And he did what all kids at the time in New York City were doing. He went to the local park to play basketball, and it's funny how my grandma said they never saw him play. And Wolf, you mentioned how my book goes, where I kind of alternate back and forth. So this very well. My mom was driving me to every basketball game I played starting in second grade. My dad was, shooting baskets with me in the driveway. For my dad, basketball was really just something he did, to make friends, to learn English, and to heal. And for my grandparents to get that call at their store, and for my dad's high school coach to say, you have to come see this boy, he's going to be special. That's, the game just kind of came out of nowhere. And, he was one of the most highly recruited players in the country in high school. He was an All-American in college, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, it really is a wonderful, amazing story. And Anya, as my mom and dad, may they rest in peace, they have passed away. But as they always would say, only in America. It was amazing to them to see what was going on. My parents came to Buffalo, New York. They were Holocaust survivors. They were young. They too couldn't speak English, but they worked hard. They struggled. People helped them. And then my dad became a very successful home builder in Western New York. It's a wonderful story. Tell us about the opportunities that you had. And Anya, remind us how you managed to get visas to immigrate to the United States and start a new life?
We were waiting about 15 years to get out, and you know how we came out. Israel made a deal with Romania to let the Jews out.
Right.
And we had an Israeli passport when we came out from Romania. We went to the highest because my husband wanted to come to America.
And the highest helped you get visas to come to America. Highest, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, that helped my parents come to the United States too after World War II. So it really was an amazing opportunity that you had, right?
We were in Italy for 6 months waiting for our visa to come to America.
And then you finally got that visa and you came to
Yes.
America. How old were your little boys when you came?
Well, Ernie was 8 years old, and my older son was almost 18.
18 was older, and your older son, may he rest in peace. It's very moving how Dan writes about him. His name was Lutzi, which is, and every time I saw the name Lutzi in the book, I knew it reminded me of my uncle, Uncle Lutzi, I called him, because my father's younger sister, we called her Tante Ruchje, who survived the war like my dad did. She married Uncle Lutzi, who was a Hungarian Jew, and they came to Buffalo also. So whenever I would read about Lutzi in your Lutzi, it would remind me of my Uncle Lutzi, who I loved very much. Yeah, Uncle Lutzi and your Lutzi. And Dan, your middle name is named after him, right?
That's right. So my uncle's American name was Leslie, and so that my full name is Daniel Leslie Grunfeld. And that's very meaningful to me. When you have the name of someone sacred in your family, you take that with you. And my grandmother spoke about her father who was killed in Auschwitz. His name was Solomon, and my son's name is Solomon. So I kind of knew what that meant, having my uncle's name as my middle name. That really stays with you, and that's kind of a part of your identity. And so I thought it was important for my son to know, what it means to kind of carry that history as well.
Yeah, my name Wolf, which is my real name. I didn't make it up, for the first Gulf War. So it's Wolf. I was named after my maternal grandfather, whose name was Wolf, and my middle name Isaac. I'm named after my paternal grandfather, whose name was Isaac Yitzchak. And so I can identify with what you were growing up with those names as well. So walk us through, Dan, because you're right about this in the book as well, specifically when you were in Europe playing basketball, or then you went to Israel and played basketball, how that impacted your life and your thoughts about what was going on as far as the Holocaust and your family is concerned.
Absolutely. So, I had a nice career at Stanford. I had a very bad knee injury my junior year, which kind of changed my trajectory a bit. But ultimately, I grew up wanting to play professional basketball, just like my dad did. And I had the opportunity to do that. I always thought it would be in the NBA, like my dad, like that's where my dad played. But I made my career in Europe. And I write in the book that I'm probably the only professional basketball player who had to call his grandmother to ask permission to sign his first contract. Anu, I'm not even sure if you remember this, but my agent called me after I graduated from Stanford, and he said, Dan, I have a great opportunity for you to start your career. You have an offer from a team in Germany. I said, well, that's great, but I have to ask my grandma, because of course this is Germany and we know what happened. And so I called Anu. I said, Anu, I have an opportunity to play professional basketball. And she said, Mazel Tov Tatala, that's wonderful. I said, yeah, but there's a problem, it's in Germany. And Anu said, what's the problem? I said, well, I don't know if you'd be comfortable with that given all that happened. And I'll never forget this. And she didn't hesitate. And she said, Tatala, sons are not responsible for the sins of their fathers. Anu, I don't know if you even remember saying that to me, but first of all, it gave me the opportunity to start my career in a place where I had an opportunity. But more than that, right, it teaches you what humanity is all about, right? And even forgiveness to a certain extent. And so that was amazing, and I went to Germany and I had a good experience there, and I, played basketball there, went well. And then I finished my career in Israel. So I did a year in Germany, 3 years in Spain. I played in the Maccabiah games in 2009. That was actually my first time in Israel. And it was a life-changing experience. As my grandma mentioned, my family was bound for Israel before they ended up coming to the States. And so a lot of our cousins were there. So my grandmother was one of 10 siblings. 5 survived, 5 were killed. And of the 5 that survived, 3 of them went to Israel and 2 went to the United States. And so I had plenty of family there. And and just connecting with the Jewish homeland, connecting with Israel was so powerful. It was a great place to play basketball. It was great food. It was, for all those reasons, we just loved it. And I played for the team in Jerusalem for 2 years, so I played for Hapoel Jerusalem. And, I write in the book, given what my family went through with the Holocaust, but then also with basketball, to play with Jerusalem across my chest, really meant a lot. And, well, if we haven't said it yet, but my dad is the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust. So it's a unique history. And so to be able to finish my basketball career in Israel was so meaningful.
And also in the book, your wonderful new book, the foreword by Ray Allen, is really, really important as well. Talk a little bit about that, Dan.
Ray Allen was recently named one of the top 75 players in NBA history. So he is just an iconic, all-time great NBA basketball player. That's very well known to the public. But what's less well known is that he is an incredible advocate for Holocaust education, Holocaust remembrance, so much so that President Obama appointed him to the board of the Holocaust Museum. And so every time that his team played in Washington, he would bring teammates to the Holocaust Museum. He wanted them to understand the history, to feel the feelings, and I think his interest in this subject matter started when he was in college and he saw Schindler's List. And he said, this is not just a Jewish tragedy, this is a human tragedy. And so we all need to know about this. And he's taken trips to Auschwitz, and we've talked about those trips. And, I'm lucky to know Ray because my dad was the general manager of the Bucks when Ray was a young player. And, for someone like Ray Allen, who's not only this all-time great basketball player, but he's a global icon. He was in the movie He Got Game. He has the opportunity to align himself with any cause he wants. But when I asked him if he would, help me with my book and write the foreword, he didn't hesitate. He stood right by me and my family. And an interesting thing is he had a close relationship with my dad from their time in Milwaukee. He had been to our house, but he didn't know that my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, because it's not something my dad talks about publicly that much. So I think it was very interesting for him to kind of understand the link between this cause that he's really passionate about and, people that he knows very well.
Yeah, and it's I did not know that Ray Allen was so involved in the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, something that I've supported since its inception, going back to the Bill Clinton administration. It's really so important that everyone who comes to Washington hopefully visits the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and gets a tour and sees what's happening, especially now. And Dan, I want to get back to your grandma in a second, but in the book you write also very personal stories of anti-Semitism that you had to go through yourself in your basketball career and elsewhere. And I wonder if you want to share a story or two with the people who are watching now.
Absolutely. Listen, I experienced anti-Semitism growing up in a lot of different forms, and it's not always overt or obvious, but you feel it. I was called names at school. I remember being called Jew boy on occasion. I tell a story in the book and I'll never forget this. When I was a young kid, I was probably 10 years old and I was in my hometown, and there was a shed at the local baseball field where they kept all the bats and the gloves and things like that. And we opened it up to play, and there was a big white swastika on the door. And I froze, and I don't think the other kids were Jewish, so they didn't quite understand exactly what it meant. But I had grown up learning about that history, of course, with my grandma and others. So that really was shocking to me and frankly scary, and so, yeah, I experienced anti-Semitism growing up. I heard people tell jokes and make comments, and, those things really stick with you. And that's why today, I always try to stand up against injustice, intolerance, any type of prejudice, because an attack against one is an attack against all. We've seen through the Holocaust what can happen when people aren't treated fairly. So I've always been really sensitive to things like that. And Wolf, one thing that I just want to echo that you said is visiting the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is a must when people are in Washington, D.C., because that's how you really connect with what happened. And I'll never forget when Anya and I went together. Anya, do you remember that when we went together?
Yes, I do.
We had such a special experience, and I write about this in the book because Raoul Wallenberg saved my grandmother's life twice, and Anya said to me, there's one thing that I want you to see before anything else. And so when we went to the Holocaust Museum, Anya, do you remember the first thing we saw?
Wallenberg.
That's right. We went to Wallenberg's Corner. There's a big picture there and information about what he did. And, you know, it was a somber day for us, but it was also emotional, moving. But it's important for all people, not just Jewish people, to go to the museum to learn this history.
Anya, tell everybody who's watching right now who may not have seen the movie, who may not know the history, what exactly did Raoul Wallenberg do that helped save your life?
Well, first he gave me Schutzpass, which means, you know, that I am a Swedish citizen. And for a while that was saving lives, you know, you show that off and they let you go for identification. They accepted, but on October 15, the government was changed. You know, it was Horthy who went against the Germans on the end, because before Hungary was fighting with Germany. But on October 15, looks like that he realized that he's in the wrong place. And he went against the Germans, but he was overthrown and came Szálasi, who was a Nazi. And he did not recognize anymore the Schutzpass. So they put us in the ghetto. I was in the ghetto, and I think it was in January, no, this end of December 44, my brother was there also with me, who was older, 2 years older than I was. And we saw the German soldiers, about 15 of them with huge machine guns, and we find out that they came to kill us. So we decided, I was young then, that we go up in the attic and we hide there. And we were in a little room in the attic for hours, and it was quiet. So we decided that one of us will go and look down what happened. And they disappeared, and we didn't know how. We saw the movie together. You remember, Tatela, seeing Wallenberg, the movie?
Yep. It came out in 1985, right? And Richard Chamberlain played Wallenberg.
He played Wallenberg. And from the movie, I find out what happened. Wallenberg find out what's going on, and he went to the commander, the German commander, and convinced him, don't do it. If you do it, you go down in history as a murderer. If you fight, you are a soldier. You have to do that. And he gave the order not to do it. So we were about 80,000 people there. But before that, the Schutzpass saved a lot of people. I myself, you know, I had about 17 Schutzpass for the family and friends, because I had a paper for the embassy.
Yeah, and Anya, I just want to make sure it's clear what you're saying. You risked your life to help other people get this.
That's right, because staying in line there, you know, it was very dangerous, because they came in and razzia, it's called razzia, you know, and identification, and they took you if you are Jewish and sent it to Auschwitz. But I took my chances, you know.
Anya,
when you are young, you take chances.
Anya, that's why I tell people you're not only my hero, but you're also a hero. That is heroic. What Wallenberg did for you, in a sense, you did it for other people.
Tatela, Dan, can I call you Tatela?
Always.
Tatela, so tell us exactly, I'm sure you've read all those stories that your grandma went through and all that. And when you were going through a difficult period, you mentioned earlier, when your junior year at Stanford, when you were playing great basketball, then all of a sudden you had that injury. Your grandma helped you get through that.
Absolutely. And so my grandma lives 25 minutes away from Stanford's campus. And so we visited when I was in 7th grade, so my older sister Rebecca could take a tour of Stanford, and I went with her. And I said, okay, this is close to my grandma, great basketball program, great school. This is where I want to go. And through luck, and I played well at the right time, I got to Stanford. And so Anu came to every single home game I played, even some road games, as she'll mention. She would come to UCLA and others. She would be at my dorm room every Sunday to pick up my dirty laundry, drop off my clean laundry, and stock the fridge. And Anu, I tell people the story that you would even clean my roommates' rooms. And I would tell you, you don't have to clean their rooms too. And you would say, if my Tatala lives here, it has to be clean. So that's all to say I was very well taken care of at Stanford by my grandma. And, I was having this great season. I was the second leading scorer in the conference. and I tore my ACL on national television in a very dramatic fashion. Anu and I, right, we still don't like to talk about this because it was a hard thing that happened. But and I write this in the book. When I was lying on the ground, I realized that I had suffered a very serious injury. Anu was kneeling down next to me, rubbing my head. Because if you remember, Anu, I got hurt not far away from where you sat. And Anu came in the locker room after when I was still trying to calm down. But I'll never forget, we went out to dinner that night. And this is a very upsetting situation because my whole life up to that point was dedicated to succeeding in basketball, and all the history that we just talked about is wrapped up in that. I knew what my family had been through. I knew what my dad had been through. I wanted to, make people proud and just kind of, live up to that history. And so this was a really difficult injury. But my grandma said at dinner that night, she said, "Tatala, if this is the worst thing that ever happens to you, you'll be okay." And I said, "You know what? That's true. Because if you look back on your life and the worst thing that happened to you was a serious knee injury, things worked out pretty well." And so I just think it's a matter of, overcoming the adversity that you face, staying positive, staying hopeful. That's something that Anu always told me. She always had hope, never lost hope throughout that really difficult time. And so for so many reasons, I applied those lessons to what I was going through.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and it's so beautifully written in the book as well. Do you want to add a point, Anya?
Yes, because he was a very good student also, that's why I helped him, because he was very busy with basketball every day and with studying, because you were a very good student.
Anu, thank you for that. So are you saying that if I wasn't a good student, you wouldn't have brought me food?
I would still love you.
Yeah, I would have gotten the food anyway, but thank you for that compliment. But it is true. And I know it's Anu saying, because she would always call me to, we would want to go out to lunch, but I couldn't do it because I was studying. And so she saw that I was working very hard and I didn't have much time to do other things. And so she wanted to help me through those things. But we all know that Anu was going to bring me food and clean my room no matter what. But I think it made her extra happy that she could help me.
And we know that after you finished your professional basketball career, you went back to Stanford, Dad, and got an MBA, one of the best business schools in the country, and you're taking full advantage of that right now. I know your dad, Ernie Grunfeld, is around someplace. I would love to see if he could join a little bit in this conversation. I'm sure he's very proud of what you've done.
I'd love that. We'll have him come. And one thing I want to say, Wolf, while he's coming, about the education piece, my grandmother is such a bright person. She loved to learn, loved to read, and she didn't get the opportunity to get her formal education because of the Holocaust, right, Anu? And we always talked about that. And so for me, even the opportunity to learn and to get that education is one you shouldn't take for granted. So yeah, I was proud to be able to succeed in the classroom, but definitely driven, by kind of the fact that my grandma wasn't able to do that. And actually, my dad is going to come sit next to me here and join us.
There he is.
Hello, Servus Anu. That means hello in Hungarian. Hi, Wolf. How are you?
Ernie, it's great to see you. Ernie, as Dan knows, as Anya knows, he, and Nancy and the whole family are very good friends of ours and neighbors as well. So you must be, Ernie, when you see your little boy who's now grown up, he's really successful. He's done an amazing job. The book is so powerful, so timely, so important. How proud are you of little Tatala?
I'm extremely proud of him. Wolf, ever since he's been a little kid, he's really been a good writer. And we didn't even know he was writing this book. He did it mainly on his own. He'd ask questions. He'd ask questions of my mother, take some notes, ask questions of me. And we just thought he was doing it as a family thing. And all of a sudden he comes out and writes this beautiful book. It is very powerful, and it tells a very important story. And it just chronicles our family's history. And it just shows how my mom is a true hero. I mean, she saved lives. I played basketball. I was a good basketball player. That's just a sport. But she played the game of life, and I couldn't be prouder of her also. She is magnificent. And, unfortunately, my dad is not with us, but, we learned so many lessons from them. And, one of the lessons that I learned at a very early age and tried to teach my children that lesson is work hard, be a good person, and good things will happen. And I'm so proud of my son because that's what he is. He's a hard worker. He's a great person, and great things have happened to him.
Basketball, though, and it comes through in the book, Ernie, I just want you to talk a little bit about it. The book is called By the Grace of the Game. There's a basketball on the cover, and the subtitle, The Holocaust, A Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream. Ernie, you have lived that unprecedented American dream, haven't you?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, but America's been good to me. I can't complain. But it started at an early age. You know, I couldn't speak English when we first came here. I was 9 years old, and my parents both worked very hard. So I go down to the playground, and I was always a good athlete, but I always played soccer when we were in Europe. And I started playing basketball because that's a city game. I grew up in Queens. And the more I played and the better I got, the more friends I had. So it helped me to make friends, and it helped me get along. And then I became a very good player as we went along. I was an All-American in high school. I was an All-American in college, won a gold medal in the '76 Olympics. I also played in the Maccabi Games right after my high school senior year in 1973. Although we only won a silver medal and my son won a gold medal. So
he knows
he has that on me.
He knows me well because I was just waiting to interject. But he can always say, yeah, I have my Olympic gold, which I'm very proud of.
Actually, my son was MVP of the Maccabi Games that he played in.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then I played in the NBA for 9 years.
But you were the MVP also at the Maccabi game.
Thank you, Anya.
He was the leading scorer. That is true. That is true.
No, he
Thank
was
you.
the MVP. I remembered he got the flower and he gave it to me.
Yeah.
When you
He didn't
lost
know
that
what to
final
do.
game
It
at the
was a
Maccabi game,
big-
Ernie, which country won?
Israel.
Israel.
Israel,
They
yeah.
had some good ball players too, right?
They did. Tal Brody, who's a very famous, he's the Jerry West of Israel. He was on that team and a very good player, great gentleman also.
Right.
He's still involved in a lot of athletic sports things in Israel. I think he's actually a sports ambassador for
Right.
Israel. But after I played in college, I played in the pros for 9 years, and I was an NBA general manager for 29 straight years. So basketball has been good to us, and that's the basketball legacy, I guess, that my son talks about.
And Wolf, one thing I'll add to that, which I mentioned in the book, you know, when my dad came to America, and Anya, you might remember this, you wanted him to go to a yeshiva in the Bronx for school, but they wouldn't admit him because he didn't speak English. But after he retired as a player for the Knicks, his first job was to broadcast Knicks games on the radio. You know, so that's really the American dream we're talking about, right? A kid comes to America, doesn't speak the language, can't even get into school because of that, and then plays for the Knicks and is now on New York radio broadcasting games. You know, it's a once in a lifetime type of story.
And it's a great story because Ernie, as you say, when you were a little boy, you first came to America, you couldn't even speak English, and the other kids in the neighborhood would bully you, right? Make
They
fun of
would.
you.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, at some point, you have to dig your heels in and keep your ground, as they say, you know, and but basketball really helped me because once I started getting good in basketball, I didn't get bullied as much because people started to respect you for being a good athlete and being a good basketball player.
It's really an amazing story. And it's one of these, as I keep saying, only in America, guys like you can grow up and become, you know, world-class basketball players. And Anya, only in America can a wonderful woman like you, you're now 96 years old. You can sit back, you can see and you have a wonderful family, not just these two guys, but the whole family. I know them all. You're really blessed with such a terrific, terrific family. And I'm so proud of all of you. But Ernie and Dan, I'm especially proud of Anya because she is
Yep.
an amazing.
We all are.
And I
Us
think
too.
I speak for all of our, as I like to say on my show, all of our viewers here in the United States and around the world on you. We want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for what you have done because you are really an amazing woman. We got to wrap it up, but I'm going to once again do what I always do. I'm going to promote this excellent book. It's really an amazing book. And Dan, I want to thank you so much, or Tatala, I could call you Tatala, By the Grace of the Game, the Holocaust, a Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream. Dan Grunfeld, forward by Ray Allen. And Ernie, you know Ray Allen. He wrote a beautiful forward, didn't he?
Yes, he really did. He's a wonderful guy.
He certainly had. He was a fabulous world-class basketball player. We're all about to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the NBA, getting ready in Cleveland for the NBA All-Star game. It's really an exciting time. And let's just get through this COVID pandemic so that all of us can actually attend and be there. A final thought, Dan, before I let you go.
I just want to thank you, Wolf. This was an amazing conversation, and I echo what you said, that my grandmother is the star of our family, of this show, and so we just celebrate her. So I do love you so much, and Wolf, thank you, and Dad, love you too.
All right, guys, we love all of you. Thanks so much. A terrific conversation. And once again, Dan, thank you for writing this wonderful book.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Dan's book, By the Grace of the Game, The Holocaust, A Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream, is available for purchase through the museum's bookshop. Details will be included in the follow-up email to this program. The program got me thinking about the power of the museum and the importance of your support. Since the opening of the museum in 1993, we have hosted countless dignitaries, heads of state, religious leaders, famous people, and professional athletes. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to accompany several players and coaches from the Indiana Pacers on a tour of our permanent exhibition. We kept the museum open late so this group of recognizable guests could visit unencumbered. We lined up the best guides and set out to explore the museum. About 20 minutes into the tour, as the guide was talking about the roots of anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany, one of the players, a tall young man, stopped the guide and said, "What's anti-Semitism?" Our director, Sarah Bloomfield, shared in an op-ed last month that in recent years, there have been some alarming studies about young Americans' lack of Holocaust knowledge. Reinforcing those findings, the museum discovered in an informal survey of 700 secondary school teachers across the US that 37% report their students have no familiarity with the Holocaust. If we strive to have a future more tolerant than the past, these statistics need to change, and students in this country need to know the facts of and the lessons taught by the Holocaust. Our museum is a critical force to sharing the truth. The work we do, the work that you help fund, is critically important, and we thank you for your support. We hope you found the program interesting, and we hope you will continue to remain engaged with the museum. Following is a list of upcoming events and information on how you can support us now. We thank you in advance and wish you a good night.